Hello, Isabel. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, Mercedes. How are you? I'm doing
Good.
great.
Welcome officially to the Array family.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm very honored to be part of the family.
we're so happy to have Lingua Franca in our catalog now of films for the world to see and experience. And we've been following this film since it premiered at Venice International Film Festival last year, which is kind of how we became familiar with you and your work. How can you talk to us about this past year and the journey? This is not your first feature film. You've made other feature films, but I'm just interested to know if there's anything different about this particular film in terms of the film festival run and sharing it up to now distribution in the U.S. With this film.
Um, yeah. So, like you said, this is my third feature film, but in certain ways, it's still, it feels like my first because it was my first after my transition, and it was also my first to be set in and produced in the US. And like even though my first two features have, traveled to some prestigious international film festivals, it was really Lingua Franca that premiered, at one of the big three,
Yeah.
and which is the Venice Film Festival. And it's been a whirlwind journey for the film so far, in terms of its film festival career. I mean, after Venice, we pretty much hit all the major film festivals in Europe as well. And here in the US, it premiered at AFI Fest and has been doing festivals after the pandemic, so virtually. So yeah, I think Lingua Franca definitely took my career to a different level, internationally. And it was kind of a risky proposition at first because like I was wondering whether I would still be well received by programmers abroad after my transition. But I'm just so you know thrilled and grateful that
Yeah, received and seen, and congratulations on your recent, I would say snatching of the grand prize at Bentonville Film Festival recently.
yeah,
Yeah, you definitely did. I guess I'm more interested to know because you wore multiple hats on this film, like
yes,
all of the hats, just rotating them on and
yeah.
off. Writer,
Mhm.
director, star, editor. My question is why, and also how, because I like sleep. So about that process of wearing all those many different hats.
um it's funny because to me, wearing those multiple hats did not seem, really too intimidating or daunting. And it's because I really love being a filmmaker. And in this film, I didn't think I was necessarily, doing different jobs, responsibilities. I had one job, and that is to tell a story
Mm,
and make my film. And that, you know, that process has a few facets and aspects. Like the script is one part of that, the direction is another part, the performance, and when you think about it, like writer directors, um, the main protagonists in their films tend to be kind of alter egos, you know or
yeah.
stand-ins for them. So it made sense to me, as an auteur, in that playing these roles made me feel like I had control and creative autonomy on the story that I wanted to tell, and you know I was very clear about my vision from the start.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How long ago did you start writing this particular film? Was this it? Has your work been sequential, where it's been like, okay, I shoot my first film, and now I'm gonna start to write and develop the second film, and now I'm gonna start to write and develop the third film, or has this been something that's been in the works between or among your other film projects?
Um, yeah, I started writing it probably a year after I finished my last movie, and
Hmm.
while I was going through my gender transition, and I was maybe like 2/3 of the way into the writing process when Trump got elected to the White House. So I think, just the confluence of all those things, my transition and the anxiety and the uncertainty and vulnerability that I felt along with other minorities, I think kind of fed into what became the mood and the temperament of Lingua Franca.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I mean, the transgender storyline is definitely a part of the film, but
yeah,
also the kind of the overarching is the
yeah,
issue of immigration, right? We
yeah,
won't say all what happens for those people who haven't seen it because it is playing on Laemmle and other places
yes,
craft soon. But immigration and this character's need to secure documentation to stay in the U.S. is kind of the catalyst for a lot of the different things that happen in the film.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I also wanted to, you know, make it a point that even though the film touches on those pertinent and very, very topical and resonant um, themes like immigration, the trans experience, I wanted to make sure that a character like Olivia is not, you know, merely encapsulated by those labels, for
Yeah.
instance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, especially in the climax of the film when she makes a decision that, people and some people in the audience may think is counterintuitive or impractical because, that would have been an easy way out for her, of her immigration predicament. But that's the moment that it compelled people to think, you know, and really put themselves in the shoes of someone like Olivia
Yeah.
and figure out why she decided the way that she did.
Right. Well, because the genre for me is just it's a love story. It's a romance story. You
Yeah.
know, if you love
Hmm.
love, watch this film. That's my plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love triumphs all. Okay, well, what you mentioned that you said you just love being a filmmaker. What parts of filmmaking do you love the most? Because I know when Ava talks about filmmaking, she says she loves the editing process. Other people don't love the editing process as much as by calling it their favorite part of the process. What do you have, like a favorite part of the process?
I agree with Ava. Actually, editing is my favorite part
Oh
of
my God.
the process because first, I mean, when I conceive of my films, I think of them as cut scenes and images, like how I'm going to string these shots and these shots together to form a scene and then a sequence and then the whole movie. So, and if there's one rule, on a film that I would never, or that would be the last thing that I would give up, it would be as an editor, because I feel like that's where the film ultimately really comes together. The
Mm-hmm.
editor is the one making, a succession of these creative calculations in terms of, where to put this and where to put that. And, you know, he or she is just using the raw material provided by all the other creatives
Mm-hmm.
working on the movie, the
Yeah.
actors, the directors. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all lovely. And well, congratulations on that. Let's talk about
Thanks.
challenges. Let's talk about the tough stuff. What was your biggest challenge in making this film? Did you experience it?
I think it really happened mostly in the financing and the pre-production because like talking to potential investors, there are certain people that wanted a creative input on how where to take the story. For instance, like we had someone who said they would invest, but only if maybe there should actually be episodes of outbursts of physical violence, and that's not the kind of story that I wanted to tell. you
Mm-hmm.
know um, so it's really a matter of creative control over a project like this. It's rare enough that you have films that center transgender women who are also immigrants, And, you know, a lot of those stories, if they have those, you know, main protagonists are tend to be directed by either cisgender, you know, or white directors. So it was important for me in this project, you know, that both in front of behind the camera, I was telling the story that I wanted to tell. And that, you know, means really figuring, you know, striking a balance with a budget. You know, initially it was about 1.5 million. And then I pushed to bring it down to just under 500K because I wanted a budget that was high enough um, that people, you know, will get paid, but also low enough that I could really pursue my artistic vision without compromise.
Yeah, yeah, because not all money is good money. We know
Exactly.
it definitely makes a difference, no matter which community you as a filmmaker, you know, identify with, like just the authenticity that comes from telling a story from within, you know, versus, you know, someone telling the story from looking outwards, inwards.
Yeah.
It can see it in a lot of films that have been made, like, oh, that person wasn't made by somebody of the community, you know, or, you know, when it is, because those nuances, you know, those little moments, and also just knowing what feels right to include or not include in the story is
Yeah.
helpful. Were there any scenes left on the cutting room floor that didn't make it in, of course, that maybe you would have liked to have seen, or you're still questioning, like, oh, I wish I would have put that moment in, or anything like that?
Yeah, there's definitely um, a whole kind of subplot about Lynn Cohen's character, Olga, because I wanted to establish Olga and Olivia as like mirror characters who are both immigrant women from different countries. So Olga, you know, was originally from Ukraine and she came to the US, you know, around the 1960s, and she was fleeing her home country, which was suffering from the aftermath of the Holocaust. Ultimately, I felt like the scenes that we shot for that strand of the story did not work. So that ended up on the cutting room floor. But that's also where I can say that I can be objective and impartial about my own work. And in fact, you know, I got into arguments with my cinematographer, Isaac Banks, who did an amazing job in the film, because, you know, those scenes were just exquisite and gorgeously shot. And I
Mm-hmm.
was telling him, like, at the end of the day, you know, it doesn't work in the movie. So that was cut out.
Gotta leave it. Sorry, Isaac.
Yeah.
I was about that relationship because you know, the director cinematographer relationship is so crucial to creating the fabric of the film, the texture.
Yeah.
So, you know, the shots that are in there are beautifully composed too. Did you guys storyboard at all? Because I just want to talk
Um,
about the trust too, because you're in front of the camera for a lot of the scenes. So how do you also hand that over and say, okay, Isaac, remember what we talked about, and make sure that he, you know, got what, you know, it's surprising that the stuff with Olga, the stuff that you would be maybe looking behind frame for, would be, or behind camera for, would be the stuff that maybe gets left out, and the stuff with you in it still kind of transfers. So can you talk about that?
yeah, you know, trust is really an important between the relation in the relationship between the director and cinematographer. And especially in my case, because I feel like, you know, the more films that I make, I'm becoming more and more visual, you know, and visually oriented. And Isaac was actually like just the second person to be attached to the project, you know, since I started developing it. Um, so by the time that we started rolling on the film, he had, you know, been part of it for 2.5 years or so. And, you know, I would send him like films that we need to study. So, you know, there's a lot of trust. Like, even though on set we would argue because he and I can have very different ways of working. Like, as an independent filmmaker, I'm used to, you know, things changing at the very last minute. Um, In fact, the slaughterhouse location that we got, that was in New Jersey, we got that literally a day before we shot there.
Mm, wow.
So yeah, I'm adaptable and flexible. I'm intuitive. So yeah, if something doesn't work or a shot doesn't work, I have no problem changing that, on the spot and thinking on my feet. Like Isaac tends to be more structured, he
Mm,
plans in advance. But at the end of the day, I think we made, quite a beautiful film, and I'm excited to have. He and I've already started talking about the next feature
yeah.
that we're going to be working on.
What is your favorite shot or moment of the film? Do you have one?
Um, I think it's the kind of like fantasy central sequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
You know what? That reminds me. Can you the title of the film, Lingua Franca? Can you talk about that? What the meaning behind that is?
Yeah, lingua franca, the dictionary definition is really just bridge language. So, for instance, in the US, between two immigrants, one is Filipina, the other who's Russian, English would be their lingua franca because that's how they would communicate to each other. But I use the term ironically in this film because, you know, although I tend to have a fascination with language in my films, it's ironic because what is actually most important between the characters is what is left unsaid and articulated. And, the silences and the pauses actually, end up being more revelatory about the
Mhm.
characters' motivations and, feel more authentic than what they actually do say to each other.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. Let me
Okay.
I have a good one in my brain. I don't know.
Okay.
I just want to know what more of what is in your head. So what should people know about this particular film? Is there anything you want them? I'm not gonna say want them to feel or take away from it, but anything that you want them to know going into it.
Um, I want people to know that, even though on paper, lingua franca sounds like a social issue drama, it touches on immigration and, yeah, the transgender experience in the United States. It's a quiet, patient, subtle film. And, it doesn't traffic in big, easy, obvious, emotions. It's not filmmaking with a bullhorn or with a megaphone. So it's an invitation to the audience to, lean closer and pay attention and to think more deeply and more critically about someone like Olivia and also about the themes that the film touches on.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you Isabel, for coming to us live from New York. You're in New York right now?
Yeah, North Carolina.
Okay, have you been social distancing?
I have,
Oh,
you know.
okay, great. That's beautiful. I love it. I'm just happy to see you with that mask on. And I know that this film is currently playing via Laemmle, Laemmle Theaters, Laemmle.com, I believe. And you can find more information about the virtual screenings that are going to be happening to anybody watching on arraynow.com. And I'm just excited to see. If you haven't seen Apparition, I haven't seen your first feature, I will admit, but if you haven't seen Apparition and you can find Apparition, I highly recommend that for our viewers. And I just can't wait to see what your fourth film brings us.
Thank you.
Thank
So much fun talking to you, Mercedes.
you too. Thanks for joining us.
All right,
Bye.
stay safe. Bye.